Homeostasis represents keeping a stable internal environment, and it's really important for cells. Water and ion concentrations have to be maintained, as well as glucose, pH, which remember those are buffers. So buffers are things that help prevent pH change, and temperature. And pH and temperature are especially important because they affect the reactions that are done by enzymes. And remember, cells and organisms in general use a lot of energy trying to maintain homeostasis. Now, transport, there is passive transport and active transport. So, passive transport means you don't use any energy. So, remember, think of this like floating down the river. You're going with the concentration gradient, you're going with the flow. And the two examples, the only examples of this are osmosis and diffusion. Now, diffusion represents molecules just spreading out. And so they move from high to low concentration. So here I have an example of diffusion where if you spray some air freshener in the corner of the room without adding any energy, it's going to go from that high concentration into the low concentration. It's going to spread out until it reaches equilibrium. So in diffusion, it's the molecules that are moving. In osmosis, it's the water that's moving. So water is moving across a membrane. And remember, it's the solute, so the salt, the sugar, whatever's dissolved in that water is not what moves. It's only the water. And the water is going to move to where there is more salt or sugar or whatever is dissolved. So for example, if I have a cell with a 10% salt solution, so 10% inside, and it's placed into a 25% salt solution, so 25% outside, the bigger number's on the outside, so water moves to the bigger number, which means it moves out of the cell. And if it's moving out of the cell, then that cell is going to shrink. If the concentrations were flipped, then the water would move into the cell and the cell would swell. But again, find where there's more salt, and that's where the water goes. Finally, we have active transport. So remember, active transport, ATP. It also requires enzymes because we are moving molecules against the concentration gradient. So we have to pump the molecules where they don't necessarily want to go. That's why it has energy involved. And these are things like muscle contractions, neurons firing, making ATP. Basically, everything that isn't passive transport. So if it's not osmosis and diffusion, it's going to be active transport.